I think chocolate is a journey that takes you over and takes you on. You think it will be something small and simple, and I thought I would buy a book, read about it, learn about it, buy some chocolate bars, but little by little, it kind of takes you over. Now, I started 70% in 2000, 2001. 70% on website, Google 70, and you can find us. And that was really because I also have a background as a programmer, and I was in a web agency at the time I had with some friends. So 70% was like our experimental show-off site where we tried new things, and that gradually took over and became more and more of what I did. And also what was surprising about that was we kind of built that as a nerd hobbyist site, really, for chocolate lovers. What was surprising was I started to get contact on our forum from people from Argentina, from Ecuador, from Guatemala, from Venezuela, from growing countries. People, farmers on the cacao side, very eager to have contact with consumers, real contacts, and to be recognized, because before 10 years ago, cacao or cocoa was very anonymous. No one knew what it was, where it came from, and no chance of recognition for the farmers. And that's been the real revolution with origin chocolate in the last 10 years. When we began reviewing chocolate, and we now have over 500-600 bars reviewed, or reviews of bars, there was almost nothing to review. There was the Valrhona range of origins, kind of broad origins, and some chocolate cell bars, blends. Because there are so many new chocolate makers starting up, this kind of micro-batch style chocolate makers starting up in the US and now beginning to happen in Europe. So we have this explosion. It's like micro-batch beer, and chocolate is becoming like wine. I'm from the UK, from London. I was born outside of London in Slough, downwind of the Mars factory, which I think had an effect on me. And I grew up in the Midlands near Birmingham, which is Cadbury country. So I grew up with quite low-level chocolate, but I discovered something better in the last 20 years. I got more interested in fine food and the source of the ingredients in food. And actually, I'm vegetarian, and it was about the same time. This is about 20 years ago. So I went to a lot of health food shops, and that was about the time that Green and Blacks began in the UK, when it was a very small project. It was the first 70% bar, and then it was the first fair trade chocolate bar. And around the same time, Lindt appeared. So we were kind of interested in this, and these new flavours of tasting cacao. Then one day I walked into Harrods store in Knightsbridge in London, and walking around the confectionery department, at the end of one aisle was a small, discreet black stand with very discreet black bars with red borders and a small booklet, and that was Valrhona back then. And I bought Valrhona Guanaja, and I think before I'd even left the shop, I was already tasting that, and that was the beginning of a journey that really transformed my idea of what chocolate could be. One of the things that's really been apparent in fine chocolate is many of these companies, like Picari or Grenada Chocolate or Original Beans, are doing fantastic directly sourced projects where they have contact with the farmer. And the point about fine chocolate is you can't make good chocolate with bad cacao. You have to have good cacao. You have to have good genetics and good processing. And generally, farmers won't do that unless they're paid reasonably well, not in the long term anyway. Most cocoa comes from West Africa. We have the idea of fair trade, but for most people in the fine chocolate industry, generally don't think fair trade is working in chocolate. In fact, even fair trade admit fair trade is not working that well in chocolate. It's adding a very small premium, either in countries where it's very difficult to trace, like Ivory Coast, or in South American countries mostly, where the price of the cacao may well be over that price already. So you're adding a very small premium. And anyway, that commodity, by the time it's in a chocolate bar, it's a very small percentage of the shelf price. So consumers are very sold on that label, though. So you might have a chocolate from one of the guys I mentioned, or a chocolatier who's using very good chocolate. And a consumer comes along at a show or something and starts asking about the chocolate, and they might say, is it fair trade? And we're trying to explain, well, this is actually way beyond fair trade. Like Grenada chocolate is made by the farmers on the farm. It's not traded. It's the chocolate that's traded. Trying to explain that to a consumer, the consumer's in many cases has moved on to the next stand, which might be selling fair trade bars, which more often than not are mass produced in 2 or 3 factories in Europe, pretty much all the same, all to the same recipe. It's very easy to create your own eco-sustainable brand and sell that for a few euros without any direct connection with the farmer, and with a lot of evidence that maybe that's not really helping the environment. I wouldn't mind that, but that's taking away trade from the higher priced but more genuine products. So it kind of fits with what we do with 70%, is trying to educate people how to taste chocolate and not to treat it with respect and not to eat it very quickly. But so everyone has this similar problem. So the idea of direct cacao is to give a common voice, a collective voice for all of these chocolate makers and chocolatiers using this kind of chocolate. So next time a consumer comes along, we can say, well, it's not fair trade, but it's direct cacao. Now that may or may not be a labelling or certification program. We're still exploring that. But it's a promotional tool. It's a way of saying to a consumer, this is a different model. We're still really early days in formulating exactly what the qualification is and how that works. To give you a good example, there's no good industry definition of what fine cacao is. We actually need to define that first. But it's definitely companies of that type. And equally, on the other side, cacao growers, because they're in the same position. To make growing fine cacao sustainable, they need to sell it at a decent price. Otherwise, they'll stop growing it. And we have a very real situation where we might lose a lot of fine cacao. Because if we don't pay more for it, it will be gone. They'll plant bananas or palm, or they'll go and work in the tourist industry, or they'll plant high productivity hybrids which destroy the soil over 8 or 10 years. So it's actually a very crucial issue. For someone like me who wants to keep eating good chocolate, then we need to find ways to protect and preserve it. One of the things I've found, and we do in our tastings now, we used to do long, complicated tastings, talking about all the refined notes of how to taste and the history. And at the moment, I've kind of boiled that down to one simple point, really, which is to eat it slowly. We have a campaign, Slow Chocolate, Melt, Don't Munch. There's a reflex, candy in hand, chocolate in hand, in mouth, in seconds. We eat it very quickly. Cocoa butter doesn't have time to melt. You can't taste any of the fine flavours. And actually, that makes good chocolate taste bad. It makes cheap chocolate taste acceptable. So it would be like eating good chocolate like that. It's like spending 40 euros on a bottle of wine. And no, most people wouldn't do that. The model has been buy a lot of cocoa from West Africa. Often that's of poor quality. It might be mouldy, it might be unfermented. The answer to that is to roast it very high. And then that tastes bitter and unpleasant. So the answer to that is to put loads of milk and sugar. Most people, I have a lot of people come up to me and say, I don't like dark chocolate. And I usually say, I agree with you. Most of it's bad. They're correct to say that. They're not making a mistake. It's not that they're not liking the right thing, they're correct. Give them good chocolate, most people can understand the difference. So we have an exciting journey of rediscovery and finding new flavours we never had before. At the same time, it's all kind of on the edge, and are we going to keep this stuff? And the only way we're going to keep it is by paying more. And we're not going to pay more for chocolate unless we eat it slower. Because then we can taste it, and then we don't need to eat so much. And then that's healthier, we get all the health benefits, we don't get huge amounts of calories. Tasting is one thing. the direct sourcing is with direct cacao is something else. Another way to get at this problem is by trying to support and reward the best chocolates and the best chocolatiers and the best chocolate makers. And this is the first year of the International Chocolate Awards, which has been set up by myself and Kate Johns, who runs Chocolate Week in the UK. And the idea is this is to have an independent and international chocolate awards. So we've worked very hard to get as many international people involved as we can. It's our first year. We've had an Italian national competition, a European semi-final in Europe, an American semi-final in New York, and a Canadian national competition. Next year we will have more. And we've had entries from as far away as Australia and New Zealand and Argentina and Venezuela and more. And it's a kind of a way of celebrating, but also helping these small quality producers be recognised, and help markets to develop in different places around the world, because we need to increase demand for fine chocolate and fine cacao. And nothing like this really exists on that kind of scale. There are plenty of competitions about craft, how to sculpt with chocolate and how to make things, or patisserie, but not with the actual chocolate products, and particularly not with chocolate bars. Like there are thousands of wine competitions. It's the equivalent of that. And I think by doing that, we're able to highlight. We hoped in doing this that the companies that would win with our judging system would be the kind of companies who were making chocolate in the model we think works, and that's proved to be the case. Because the fundamental of making chocolate, it's a process you can get wrong at any stage. If you have bad genetics or bad cacao or bad harvest or bad fermentation, processing, all those things can make it go wrong. So actually to make good chocolate is a very difficult, quite unlikely and not necessarily profitable business. So we really need to support from the farmers through to the chocolate makers, that whole chain. So it's another way of supporting the industry. For me, it's about interest and variation and different origins. And one day I'm going to like something, and the next day I want to try a different origin. My palate leans towards citrus and fruits and red fruits. So I particularly like Madagascan chocolate. It's always going to works with many people. But it's exciting to discover black olive notes in Nicaragua and Nicaraguan cacao, which smells like the finest Italian gianduja or something. Or Ecuador, we have these floral notes, or there's this kind of white bean cacao in Peru, or the kind of whiskey, rum, sulphurous notes of Dominican Republic or something. That's the excitement, and that's the fun. So give me a big box of about 50 and I might be happy. Well, origin chocolate is about chocolate from the source. It's about chocolate that's made with cacao that's come from a known source, that we've got some direct connection between the bar that we're eating as a consumer and the farmer, and where the cacao's come from and the variety. It might just be the country, but it's more interesting if it's a region or a plantation. And I think also that we have some connection with the flavour of those two, because the traditional model of making chocolate is to start with cacao that tastes like A, maybe it's from Ivory Coast or something, and process it heavily into something that tastes different, B. But the modern movement, the new exciting events happening in fine chocolate is to say, I've found good tasting cacao. How can I put those flavours into chocolate with the least adulteration and give the consumer the experience of the cacao? So that's really what I get from origin. That's what it means for me.